this strategy and policy meeting. We have a couple of bereavements which I wish to acknowledge and deal with firstly. And the first one, of course, is Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and much has been written and said, so I don't need to extol her, but as a group of people who are committed to community, I think we can do nothing but admire 71 years plus of service and a total commitment. And so I think it's appropriate that we stand for a moment's silence, and I ask you to honour her by doing that. Thank you. Secondly, well, Evelyn, have you got a karakia or something that would be appropriate at this stage?
I'm more than happy to do that, Mr. Chair. Tēnei te pānui o te pīhopatanga o Aotearoa. So Bishop Don Tamahiri, who is the bishop to whom I am accountable, Archbishop to whom I am accountable, on the occasion of the death of Her Majesty the Queen. Ka rewa ake rā te toki ki runga, ki tō toki he tangatanga, he toki whakaruki, he toki no tua whakarere o te pō, o whakamoia. Whakamaua te kakao o te toki, i o urihiki iho, ki tū tapawai, te whareariki. Te rauhuia titi tonu ki tō tangi. He tapu, he mā rohi rohi, he awe awe mo nā uri whakaheke tangata. Te mana, te tapu, te arihi pokai whenua, te kāpuehu, o te hāhi o Ingarangi, Kuini Iri Hapati te tuarua, mā ranga mai tō tōki ki runga. He tine te kahu katū, he tai whakawehi whenua, he kura hau tū, i ngā kura tiwa ka potanua i te awa. Haere i rungi te huarahi o te takatini, haere i rungi te huarahi o te takimano, haere i rungi i te huarahi kua takoto i o tūpuna ariki i haere i mua noa atu i a koe. I oki oki te hunga oki oki, whakarongo atu rā i te pūtakitanga o rehua, i te huinga o te kahurangi. I moe rā koe i te mārietanga o te pō. O aramai anō koe i tō kororiatanga i te atua nui i te rangi. Raise up your sacred adze, though the adze you hold has become loose, and adze of strength has so drifted into the darkness of death. May you sleep in the night. Your sacred adze passed down and grasped by your descendants. Behold, the sacred adze has been grasped tightly by your people. The very feather of the sacred huia that adorns your head can be seen from afar by the many peoples. The prestige and power of your sacredness, the authority you behold as the head and as the compass of the Church of England. Queen Elizabeth II, raise your sacred adze above the heavens. Let light shine upon the cloak of death that adorns you, the cloak laid, and in which you find rest upon your lands as weeping and lament. Go forth on the path that was laid before you by your ancestors, that many may have pierced the veil. You now join their company. Go forth, and may the stars in the heavens above sing you to your rest in the glory of heaven. Rest in peace and rise in glory. In Ngāti Atua. Yeah, Manaki. Just also to add to that, on behalf of Te Marama and the mana whenua of Tēnei Rohe, our deep regret on the loss of your late colleague, Jan Riddell. We admired her deeply and enjoyed working alongside her, and I'm sure all of you have many more stories than I have, but it sometimes is said that the death of a chief takes others with them, and so perhaps it wasn't entirely accidental that Jan has joined the Queen on this particular last journey. Nō reira e te whānau i hui hui mai nei. Nei rā te mihi pauri, nei te mihi manaki hia koutou i tēnei wā pauri. Even though it's quite sad, we are joined together to share the load. I will leave these words with you so that they can be entered into your record.
Thank you, Evelyn, and that's a nice segue into the second part of our bereavement acknowledgement, which is Jan Riddell. And I have, with some assistance, produced something of a note of condolence which recognises her involvement in a wide variety of things in Southland. And at the end of actually reading this, so that it will become a record of Jan, I will move that we send it as a note of condolence to the family. So I'll just read what we've got prepared. We were saddened to hear of the passing of former councillor Jan Riddell, whose huge passion for the environment, water quality issues, conservation and biodiversity were reflected in her lifelong dedication to them. A farmer and hydrologist from Rounds, Jan served as a councillor for 12 years, being elected to the inaugural Southland Regional Council in 1989 and was farewelled in 2016. Jan's involvement with the council began as a result of her connection with the Waiau River, chairing the Waiau Working Party. She also worked as a part-time planner at the Waiau Fisheries and Wildlife Habitat Enhancement Trust, chaired by the Southland Conservation Board, was a local government representative of the New Zealand Conservation Authority, a committee member of the Nature Heritage Fund and secretary of Forest Hill Foundation. During her time at the council, Jan was a member of many committees, including the Environmental Management, Strategy and Policy, Consents and Corporal Management and Audit Committees. Jan chaired the Environment Management Committee in the early 1990s and was heavily involved in the development of our environmental monitoring programs. From 2013 to 2016, she was chair of the OPAC and Audit Committee. Jan's contribution to not just council but to the wider Southland environment and community were immense, and this was recognised through the awarding of a Queen's Service Medal. Our thoughts are with her husband Dave and daughter Emma at this time. So I would like to move that a letter of condolence be sent to Dave and Emma, which includes the narrative which I've just read to you. So I'll
second that, Mr. Chairman, and there'll be a card that everybody's welcome to sign that can go with that, those nice words. So happy to second that.
Seconded. Is there any discussion? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, just for noting, the council, which I signed on behalf of council, sent a note to Jan while she was still alive, and while she was in the final stages of her illness, we acknowledged her work and her. We were sending our thoughts to her at that time. So that also.
Well, thank you for doing that. As I was talking with Robert earlier, I was totally unaware that she was indisposed till I read the notice in the death column, and it was a huge shock.
Yeah.
So she was a very stoic lady, and she wouldn't have wanted to burden anybody else with the knowledge that she was suffering. So we just acknowledge her at this time. So I'll put the motion. Those in favour would say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. That's agreed. We come to apologies, and I have apologies from Bonnie and David, Councillor Major and Stevens. Are there any others?
Is Jeremy on this committee?
No. So someone like to move that the apologies be accepted? Lloyd. Those in favour would say aye.
Wrong.
Those in favour would say aye. Against, no. That's agreed. Right. Declarations of interest. Not been noted of any, so we move to item 4, public forum petitions and deputations. Again, are there any? And we move then to the confirmation of the minutes of August the 3rd, which have been circulated. Would someone like to move that they be accepted as an accurate record of that meeting? Yep, Nick moved and seconded. Lyndall. So the accuracy is open for discussion. Is there any omissions or erratum? Yes.
Only I thought I did put an apology in, but I see there's no acknowledgement of the apology.
Who did you? Well, I hope it wasn't me, because I would have done it if it was me.
Oh, no, Ian Wakefield come and sat in.
Right, okay. I think, look, Stuart, I think the explanation is Anne was a little bit late in joining.
Yes.
So we'll accept your intention and include your apology if it's.
That's great. Thanks.
Righto, thank you. Yep, so that's how that would have happened. Anything else? So the minutes as amended, those in favour would say aye, against no, that's agreed. Right, item 6, notification of extraordinary business. Supplementary reports, not received notification of any. Questions? It's going very well. Chairman and councillor reports. I don't have a report at this stage. So we just keep moving then, if that's the case. So, item 1, managing our wetlands. Lucy, do you want to talk to us?
So just first up, take obviously the report as read. It relates to the consultation that the Ministry for the Environment are currently conducting on managing our wetlands in the coastal marine area. This follows the release of the NESF, the National Environmental Standard for Fresh Water, and some implementation issues with the particular part that they're consulting on, which relates to wetlands that have been defined in a certain way that has meant that they are caught within the coastal marine area. That's problematic for a number of reasons, which we've outlined in the report. And the draft submissions attached there with just the answers to the questions that they're currently seeking our feedback on. I did have a slight addition to table. So we're recommending at the beginning of the draft submission that we just insert an additional couple of sentences to acknowledge the fact that whilst we appreciate the opportunity to submit on the current consultation on this particular element of the NESF, and that below we have outlined our response to the consultation questions. In addition, the council would like to note that whilst the proposed changes address that element of the NESF that we know has been problematic to implement, issues do remain on the practical interpretation and therefore the operationalisation of regulations within specific areas that don't neatly fit within the wetland definitions. And we would appreciate an opportunity to discuss this directly with officials so that we could try and iron out some of those.
So you want to insert that into the summary?
Yes, into
After the first para?
at the very top, well, underneath,
Right, above two?
Yes.
1A.
Yep, that would be great.
Good. Okay. Lloyd, you had some concerns.
Well, I raised this with staff during the week, and I had specifically Waituna in my mind, but I also knew that Te Waihora is captured, and also is the some lake areas around Waikato, and also the mangroves in Northland. And I wanted to pick up that there is, while this deals specifically with the CMA, there was bigger issues sitting out there, and we should not, because the definitions become so important on this process, we should not be unaware of the bigger, wider global view here. And I wanted to give staff a heads up and a time to come through with response that would be appropriate for that, and that's what they've done. So I'm more than happy to insert that into our submission. And that was the reason why I raised it with staff.
So I think the way we would do that is that you would move that the summary be amended to include the note which has been supplied, or words to that effect. So is there a seconder for that? Yeah, Alan? Okay.
Just clarifying, so that in the actual submission that starts on page 13, that's where you wanted to put it, though, it's not.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Well, we should actually put that resolution for a start, so that then becomes part of the narrative. So those in favour would say aye.
Aye.
Against no, that's agreed. So that's at the top of page 13 is. And right, Nicol, you will want to comment.
Yes, I guess it's more than it's a comment and a question, I guess. How well does this now line up with New Zealand coastal plan and our own plan? Because there seems to be inconsistencies in perhaps restricted discretionary as opposed to sort of a higher order prohibited or non-compliant, which are very high bars. And if you've got two competing very high order documents, how does that fit together, and does there need to be more change? Because it's causing confusion at the moment, and I'm just wondering, is there anything else we can add? I know it's probably not a specific question of us, but I know this is an issue up and down the country, and we all want to protect existing wetlands, but when it's capturing lagoons, etc., and you've got two competing instruments, that must cause confusion too.
Yes, so through you, Chair, there is more work that needs to be done to clarify the boundaries and also to clarify how the ministry both intended for this provision within the NES to be implemented and what they were trying to catch, which is one of the things that they're trying to address with this particular proposed change. So you raise a really good point around lagoons and mangroves, and that's one of the reasons why this change is being addressed, because it's catching mangroves, swamps, all sorts of other things that wasn't intended. So the regional sector more widely has pulled together a submission which tackles some of those issues. Staff have been involved in that and are intending to be supportive of that as well. If the council would like to see, we can obviously share that around, but it does cover some of that. To your other point around the NZCPS, the coastal policy statement, and our own coastal plan, the NZCPS is a high bar, is the higher order document that we have to make sure that our plans give effect to. So when a consent comes in, the consent officers would be checking all the way up through the hierarchy. So yeah, the fact that it's more stringent, they both need to be complied with. So does that answer your question, Chairman?
I think so. At the moment, there seems to be a difference between freshwater and the coastal plan, and I think in a perfect world we'd like some clarity for going forward too.
Yes, Stuart.
Yeah, kia ora. Just reading some of the documentation, I think we need to be careful that there's there was a suggestion there that might name some of the places that do actually have an influence in the inland wetland areas and those actual coastal wetlands, that there actually sometimes there is quite an influence between the two. So there was a suggestion in the document that we may need to identify where those influences, where that does come about, and perhaps give a bit more attention to those particular, rather than just a clear line across the whole lot. Going one way or another, that was to take time and work our way through to see if there is those. They're talking about hydro system classifications was the reason they went there. So those, I guess it's those hydro systems that we need to be looking at.
Okay, you've got a comment?
Oh, just briefly, I would say absolutely agree with you, Stuart. And one of the things that we need to be factoring in as part of our plan change to a Tahi approach and how we make sure we're giving effect to QTI is exactly that, to think about how we systematically look at the whole picture to make sure that we're addressing it when we need to.
So this has got to be in by the 21st,
Yep,
is that
that's
right?
right.
Now, do we know if anybody else from Southland is submitting to this, and is there some coherence between any other party and us? Should that be happening?
I haven't heard of the TAs. I don't think are submitting separately. We often offer them, we say we'll do the analysis, and then if they would like to jointly submit, then they can. It's broadly a topic that influences our work more so than others. I'm not aware of anybody else separately submitting. Possibly Tront from, but otherwise, yeah. And like I say, the regional sector, is all of the regional councils have done a joint submission on the implications of the change for the sector.
Yeah, Lloyd?
I just comment, Mr. Chairman, that we're fortunate in Southland in having a huge range of different types of ecosystems where the salt water meets the fresh water, and a lot of these are easily accessible, and we've got lots of school field trips that explore those. So we're very fortunate. I did meet a field trip out at Daffodil Bay some years ago who'd come to do a mangrove study without they borrowed something from a Whangarei college without having checked on the geographical limits of the mangrove, and finding that they were about 1,500 k's out But we turned it
For the
into,
moment.
we turned it into a crowd park, so nothing was made.
Oh, very good. Good initiative. Rachel?
Yes, your message for your
Oh.
cameras somehow flipped off, sorry.
Oh. We can do that. Video.
And I apologize for my microphone.
Right. Yeah, okay. So we accept also a late apology from Anne Wakefield, who's become a bit indisposed. So can we just acknowledge that with our, I don't think we need to formalise that. We just will acknowledge that as it's occurred at this point. Now, sorry, Lyndall.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Just a question about timeframes, given that there's a lot of pressure on other areas and timeframes. Are you concerned that this work that needs so much more work is going to be needing to be done in a hurry at some point? Not by us, by the others.
Through you, Chair, one of the things that I would flag is that there was always intention that the NES ceases to exist in its entirety once we do our NPS implementation. So our NPSF implementation is the Plantains to Otahi route. So we need to make sure that what we make Southland specific and through that does what we need it to do. The NESF, I think, will continue in some ways, but it's going to continue to be mildly problematic for a little while, I think. So we will try and influence the ministry, and if the council would like, we can try and do that with some energy. But as you say, yeah, we've got limited resources, so we've got to put our energy where it's most useful.
I think I've been very patient so far with your wording. So energy, absolutely from me, thank you.
Right. No other comments? Yes, Lloyd?
But yeah, I was just wondering, Lucy made a comment earlier on that while we can put this submission in, and as we've amended it, but I think the follow-up conversation, either with the CE or the chair, with developer, Wellington contacts, is actually quite important, because they need to understand while we're giving a global view back, we actually need to talk about Pacifics, and that forum may be the best way to highlight some of these issues in the background that's happening and the things that we're facing because of this and the unclear pathway forward.
Nicole?
Well, it's probably not specifically covered here. The concern at the moment up and down the countryside is a High Court ruling which almost appears to have included woodlands like of Waituna, like of Te Waihora, right up to the Doon Lakes in Northland. I think it's an unintended consequence that I guess one plea I would have is that MFE would go through the legal process of clarification. If we have to do it as the first cab off the rank with Waituna, for instance, there's a huge cost, and I'm sure it's an unintended consequence because fish passes and all sorts of things. There's going to be quite a considerable concern up and down the countryside, let alone the fact that a huge amount of land will be inundated, because we have some people interpreting saying it's a prohibited activity to open any of these light holes or lagoons, and that I think that needs to be clarified.
Okay. Right. Lucy, can you just explain to me recommendation number 2 to provide feedback for the draft submission? Now, this has got to be lodged by the 21st. So what does that actually mean if we move that we're going to extend it or get some comment back to you before the 21st, or what does this mean?
Yes, thank you. I think it was more to make sure that you had an opportunity to provide feedback. So noting that we've had some discussion and
Right,
feedback's
so-
been given, I'm comfortable that
So
we can.
when we saw the agenda for today, that was to stimulate us to.
Indeed, yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
So for clarity, if there's anything that occurred, when are you forwarding the?
We will send it, what day are we on now? 14th, so next week it will go, Monday.
So, yeah, okay, so if any councillors want to respond, they should do so by Friday.
That would be wonderful, yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
So having acknowledged all that and no further discussion, would someone like to move the recommendations? Lyndall and Lloyd. Right, I'll put the motion, those in favour would say aye. Against no, that's agreed. We move to item 2, climate change. Rachel, are you talking to us about this?
Thank you, Chair. So this is an update following on from previous updates on the climate change portfolio and the work that's been advancing in that space. So as you'll be aware, we have a regional working group being established, so we've received staff nominations and we will receive governance nominations post the elections next month. We've also had a session with Dr. Carr over the last month. We've been working on some key foundational pieces to inform both the work of our own climate change subcommittee and the regional work that will occur. So in particular, there's been a huge amount of national direction this year with the release of the emissions reduction plan in May and the more recent release of the National Adaptation Plan last month. And so this item contains an analysis, an initial analysis of those two documents and what they might mean for our work programs going forward. And I think the thing to note is there will be significant further discussion on this through workshops over the coming months as we develop our next long-term plan, but also through the work of the subcommittee and the regional working group.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much for that, Rachel. And I'm not sure if you were the one responsible for inviting Dr. Rod Carr here for the meeting. It was an extraordinary meeting, extraordinarily successful, and so great to see all the mayors and chairs in here. I think if that was you, then congratulations.
It's an opportunity we were given, but a very fortuitous opportunity.
Absolutely, and I think that the takeaway for me, for this council, from what he said, he talked about two things: the role of central government in mitigating, and that's pretty much not sorted, but something that we don't have to apply ourselves too much. Adaptation was something that sits with local councils and local communities, and I found that a very powerful message. And I hope that everybody else in the room did too, because that puts us in the driver's seat for protecting our people, essentially. So it really was a tremendous afternoon. Thank you for that.
Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think in all of this, our most important thing will be developing a full council committee. We have to do that right, get the bones of it right for it to go forward. That's going to be our biggest challenge. We're going to need our best people on the job, I think, for that too. But I'd just like to go on your work program is 9.6. It says accelerate sustainable and secure supply and uptake of bioenergy. It says the government will set up a work program. So I've got a problem with that straight away. I think that's something that we should be front-footing in this province, and we go back to what Rod Carr said, that we have the opportunity to in Southland to set up that logistics around that bioenergy in this province. So I would hope by 2022 to 24 within the next term that why can't we pull the Climate Change Committee, pull in really important processes in this province that rely on coal and bring them in and start to what you could call imagine what a system would look like in this province, and let's do it ourselves, not just wait for government
What
to
are
come
you
up.
doing about this kind of a discussion?
Yeah, and I think that's what we need to do is to front foot that. It's just a suggestion.
Thank you. Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was looking through the pages 20 onwards and noticed that the lead, that's probably as Peter has pointed out, the lead seems to be central government or a government agency. I'm not sure what our role is in that and how we actually land that when we talk about the detail. I'm very aware that on page 17 it talks about transport, energy, building, agriculture, forestry, waste, etc. But we've got a huge development plan sitting in this province going forward. In other words, we need double the energy. We're going to do a whole lot of things if that plan plays out to the extent of what it is. And we aren't clear whether TY is going to continue or not. The government was hoping, in the plans I've seen, that TY would be would discontinue, and that emission savings would be a credit to our pathway. So I'm unclear about how this jigsaw comes together, because it seems to be fighting each other. And I think the government has a role to play, and we have a role to play in that as well, as seeking clarification about how these things come together.
Yeah, useful comment. Thank you. Lyndall? Or did you want to respond?
Just a couple of points, I guess. Firstly, the two documents combined very much set out the central government work program in this space, but they're very clear in the front part of both documents about the role of local government, and then particularly, as has been acknowledged, in the climate adaptation space. So yes, there is a list of actions that central government will be undertaking, but that does not, well, there's still a need for local government action as well, very definitely. So just to note that, maybe to round back to some earlier comments, I just wanted to highlight to the committee that the Dr. Carr presentation was recorded. You hopefully received a link to that, and we'll be sending that out to all the councils and Te Marama if people would like to watch that. But we also are compiling a summary document of the key points that were made during the presentation. And one of the points that Dr. Carr did make was in that bioenergy space, and certainly that's something we will put on the agenda for the next climate change subcommittee and also the regional working group discussion.
Thank you. Lyndall?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, a really comprehensive and detailed analysis. So thanks to Rachel and the team, because it's, when I started looking at it, it hurt my brain. I was like, oh, this is really big and really hard. And it is, actually. So, well done, and trying to make it work for our brains. And it'll be a really good resource, actually, as the committees, right across all the committees, start analysing their work that they're doing with this in mind. And I think our mission is to find a way that regulatory services have easy access to the things that are directly influenced or influencing these actions. I was going to recommend that everybody also listen to Dr. Carr's presentation, because it was really good. And I'm going to just do it again and again. The other thing is that the critical actions, I guess, are what we, because if you start looking at all the green bits, it also gets a bit overwhelming. So I think, from my perspective anyway, the Climate Change Committee, when we meet next, might need to have a look at those critical actions. And I guess my question is, for Rachel, is how we might start, I don't expect an answer right now, how we might start working that into those other conversations across the broader committees. Thank you.
Nicole?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, a little like Lyndall, I felt quite exhausted after I read through that list. Then I reflected on the fact that our direction had been that climate change is going to be factored into everything we do. So we're not doing all those things tomorrow, but it's actually the right direction. Just responding to some questions earlier, we are going to get national direction, but we've got a clear message about regional flavour from Rod Carr the other day. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel, but we need to be aware of the areas that we personally responsible for, or putting a regional flavour on, which makes sense. So a very good report, and it just does show the length and breadth of some of those actions going forward.
Alan?
Just clarifying, so did we develop that table, or is that a document that came out of central government, which obviously looks to indicate where, I guess, the lead is, and obviously identifying many of the actions that are required? If they've done it, is there a contact point? So do we have a contact point within those MFE and MB and MPI? Particularly, we had Janelle, who's no longer in the building. But I would like clarifying: is she working with us, or are we looking to gain a new resource, which might be the link between all these government departments who are the lead. How do we get that lead back into our room so that we know who to work with? Because multiple issues, and you know, we as a group here will need to know who we are working with in central government.
So through you, Chair, the analysis was undertaken by Environment Southland. It was actually work Janelle initiated prior to her departure. So she is still on contract to us, but because she is working for the Ministry for the Environment, she has limitations around what she can do going forwards, but she's certainly there in an advisory space for us. We have been looking at resource across the organisation, and we do have some vacancies that we're intending to recruit for shortly that will bring additional horsepower into this space.
Right, Lyndall.
Sorry to have a second go, but Ellen's just made me, Councillor Beard has made me think that actually, is there a lot of people that we could send this analysis to go, actually, look what what is going on for us? So that it's not just us that goes, well, there's quite a lot of going on. I'm not sure who we would send it to. There might be 20 people we should, but maybe we should.
Through you, Chair, we have shared it with the Climate Change Working Group, the staff from the other councils.
And MB and MOT and MFE and DOC and all those other agencies listed here.
Plus probably the other TAs as well.
Indeed. That might happen through that.
That's a suggestion that Rachel was noting down, so I think that will
We have shared it at a staff level at this stage with
Yeah,
both.
okay. Probably a formal,
Yeah.
I don't think we need a motion to that, I think you're activated. Was there any other comments that, Nicol?
You know, industry are moving quite quickly on this. I'm not sure how confidential, but I hear that Air New Zealand are looking at introducing 20% biofuel or user-friendly type thing to their aviation fuel in the near future. So some of the stuff when we talk about biofuels, a lot of the stuff's already starting to happen. Industries are starting to pick up their responsibilities, and so some of the stuff it's on our list, but we won't be physically doing it. Other people are going to be doing it. We know the Richardson Group looking at hydrogen for the transport fleet. So there's a lot going on. It isn't just the councils, it's not just the government departments. It's actually industry as a whole actually starting to pick up the baton on this.
There are actually 4 transport agencies in Southland that are considering hydrogen, not just the Richardson groups. I think the Richardsons are the most advanced, but discussions are certainly taking place with 3 others as well.
We recognise it in today's paper, I guess, that we're seeing that maybe they've indicated when they're going to cut the turf, but the next wind farm to be erected in Southland, I guess only 10 towers, but they never indicated what the long-term number.
Where is that?
So the Kaiwera wind farm has been indicated it's underway, 116 million investment by Mercury, and in a year's time, I think they're really saying it's going to be.
There's another assessment being done out on Venlaw as well, and I'm not sure where that one sits, but work is going on. Stuart, you were looking to make a contribution?
I was trying to look through here and I can't see where there might be an assessment of new technologies before they're brought online by cost and benefit. And I guess at this time I'm concerned about the electrifying our vehicle fleets. But has anyone ever actually done an assessment of the consequences of that? That's sort of springs to mind about bringing rabbits in to get rid of. I mean, bringing weasels and get rid of rabbits, but no one's ever thought about the consequences of that. And are we doing the same thing again, bringing the electric batteries in cars without having a look at the consequences of that? I don't see that in any sort of assessment of new technologies.
Right. Fair question. Rachel or Lucy, who's going to respond?
I was going to suggest, Chair, I understand those assessments have been done, but I will follow up with central government and we can provide some information to the next committee meeting.
It's the top of the cliff, isn't it? Instead of the bottom.
I think information that I've received that if we are to electrify a third of our fleet and do hydrogen or an alternate fuel, hydrogen cell, on the other 70%, plus stop burning coal, we need 7 Manaporis equivalent. So I think people are aware of the consequences. The plan going forward's a bit more vague.
I guess I'm talking about the waste.
Oh, yeah, of the
Nuclear power is beautiful if there was no waste product.
oh,
so-
that's quite right.
Well.
There's hungry enzymes come out of there somewhere.
It's waste, right?
Anyway, that's a good point you've made, and that's acknowledged, Peter, and then Lloyd.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say, talking about forestry in here and encouraging Indigenous native forestry, which I totally agree with, but we must be quite clear, as Dr. Carr pointed out, that the size of the pie for the reductions are set. So if we've got to be careful we're not steering people away from exotic forestry too, because that's going to be a really important part of the toolbox. Because if we discourage that, we're pushing emissions reductions somewhere else. So just that language around that, but we need to be quite careful too, so I do understand that.
Lloyd, and then Robert.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm probably jumping into the spatial space global view, and I think Stuart's quite right. I think we need to look back before we go forward. And looking back, we haven't done some things very well. And right now, I'm aware that there's a car yard, I think it's in Ashburton, that's got a whole lot of EVs in it that has no way of actually processing it.
No.
So we need to think about this in a global context. If whatever pathway we go, and I don't mind, but we need to make sure that we're smart about our business and not actually create other avenues. So I just hope that when we have those discussions that we need to, there's a lot of stuff that we can tidy up that is already sitting in that, under that bigger waste regime. And if we can be smart going forward, then we'll be fine. But
Robert.
that's my.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, my observation would be that most of the talk I hear is about maintaining what we presently have in terms of power. I think is utterly unrealistic, and there's so very little talk about powering down. And yeah, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the fleet. Well, my feeling is the fleet is going to have to shrink considerably, and then that will change all of these.
Dynamic.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm just pointing out that we are not talking that way very much at all. And I know it's hard to do, but that's where I think the solution lies, rather than just replacement and keeping up that energy. And I know that rankles, but I think it's the truth. Thank you.
Cool, Lyndall.
Thanks. I was going to move the motion, but I'd just like to reinforce what
Yeah.
Councillor Guyton said, and that was the impetus behind a lot of what Dr. Carr had to say about actually changing lifestyles and energy use. But anyway,
You'll move the
I am moving the
recommendation on page
recommendation.
16.
I am, that says that.
Is there a
we don't-
seconder? No, Nicole, thank you. Put the motion, those in favour would say aye. Those no, that's agreed. We move to page 38, water and land portfolio update. In your hands, is it, Lucy? Thank you.
So yeah, through you, Chair, this, we have a standing item now, the last few, strategy and policy committees to provide an update of the water and land portfolio work that's advancing in between meetings. So since our last meeting and our last update, we've had a couple of workshops, on topics relating to planting to Tahi, with particular focus on allocation, co-order plans and farm plans, as well as farm debt and the IAL. Staff have continued to be working on our on the work programme for the Plantation to Tahi, and also our analysis of the regional forum's recommendations. We've had a couple of stakeholder interactions, and we had a session online on the beginning of August, and have initiated a kind of ongoing route by which stakeholders can raise concerns or questions. One of the ways that we've just gone out and asked for some feedback on the regional forum's recommendations. So Adrian and the communications team reached out to stakeholders to get some of their thinking around those recommendations. So as with my previous report, take this one as read, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions and Over to yourself.
Questions or comments? Lloyd?
Just a very bit of detail, but I noticed in the report we talked, and we've had that conversation about farm debt, we had that workshop. But I actually wonder whether we should be more generic. It's really business debt or the debt of the different attitude, different parts of our society are important. Inflation's going to play a bigger role, mortgage rates are going to play a bigger role. And a loss of, if I call it free cash, but loss of the ability to reinvest through those. We probably need to pick up the concept of that, I think, through there. It's bigger than just farm debt. That's a very visual thing, but the other things are sitting behind that. Because they're urban and farming are so interrelated, they are leveraging off each other, and they're all affected by those 4 or 5 different things I've just mentioned.
Any other comments? Well, if there's no further comments, would someone like to move the recommendation on page 38? Alan and Lyndall, those in favour would say aye, against no, that's agreed. We come to item 4 on page 42, science update, groundwater. Are you doing this, Ewan?
Yes,
Right, cool.
got a bit of a presentation, so quickly whip through if that's all right.
That sounds very good.
First 12 months was quite good. Second 12 months was shit. It's been garage after 6 months out of the last 8. Well, actually, probably 7 of the last 8.
Are you going to put it on our screens or do I turn round? I'm happy to do whatever's required. I don't want to lose eye contact. Beauty, thank you.
Go through slides.
Oh, do you want to do it?
I can say it's team associated with the change.
Which is?
So I can see got it back. Sensor of the battery. Sensors into a super cold can't charge.
Oh, okay.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā ata, ko Ewan Rodway, toka wingoa. I've got with me Phil McCartney, who's the groundwater scientist in our team. So yeah, just a brief update on groundwater monitoring in the region. Next slide. I'll probably just sit here and do it.
Can you sit down there?
Oh, yeah.
I'll follow you around the room, but.
So yeah, of course, this is about groundwater. As you all know, is that water that's in between the sand and gravel beneath our feet. Slide, please. So more specifically, the monitoring that we do at Environment Southland and the science team. So I'll briefly touch on what monitoring we do, some of the results from that, and also, why we do this monitoring. Of course, one of the main reasons is for us to be able to assess the state and trend of our different resources pertaining to groundwater. That allows us and ES to make management decisions around that as that information is passed up and through the organisation. One of the big things is to improve our understanding of the environmental system and, of course, to meet requirements under national legislation as we are required to monitor some of these things. Just a brief run around some of the potential issues that we observe in Southland in relation to groundwater. In particular, I guess, in relation to the way that humans use it. For example, interference with different takes or bores, stream depletion, the abstraction of water from the ground that affects our rivers and streams, water quality, what that groundwater, what the quality of that is, what contaminants are existing in there. Sustainability, of course, are we using the resource appropriately to enable for future use and for the sustaining of ecosystems. Saltwater intrusion is one that we don't experience too much in Southland, but does happen. So, the abstraction of water that causes the interaction or with saltwater. And believe it or not, land subsidence can occur if you abstract too much water, and that can actually cause the land to subside. So, talking about water quality, we monitor 33 sites across the region for quality. There are some additional sites as well, which are part of a national groundwater monitoring program. So this data that I'm showing here is from LAWA, and whilst LAWA is not the source of all information, science information, as it doesn't contain some of our regional objectives and values, but it can be a useful place to look for some things. So in particular, this here is showing E. coli monitoring at our bores across the region. And you'll note that 28 of 33 sites had a detection of E. coli in the period between 2016 to 2020. So that's the majority of sites where we're picking up microbial contamination in this groundwater. Granted, some of that might be due to wellhead protection issues, but some of it is due to the fact that we are getting microbial contamination into our groundwater across the region. Another contaminant that we look at is nitrate nitrogen. So this map from LAWA shows us median nitrate nitrogen concentrations between 2016 and 2020. And we can see that there are 4 sites out of our monitoring bores that have concentrations in excess of 11.3 milligrams per litre, which is the drinking water standard. So that's something that we commonly assess nitrate against. But I guess concerningly, there are also quite a lot of other sites that are getting up there on the scale of contamination of things. Perhaps more concern, that's nothing new, you know, we know that there is nitrate contamination in our groundwater, but perhaps more concerningly is this assessment of trend from LAWA. Now trends are tricky, they are affected by lots of different things, but in this assessment between 2016 and 2020, we can see that there are 16 sites which have a likely degrading or very likely degrading trend established for that 10-year period. So I guess to look at it, there's potentially more sites degrading rather than improving. We also monitor about 250 other sites through our compliance network, and this adds context and the ability to sort of add spatial resolution to our groundwater quality monitoring. I won't talk about that now, but it allows us to produce things like this map, which gives us a bit more of a spatially extensive representation or estimate. And of course, our understanding of the conceptual system, you know, how groundwater moves through our environment, and its relation to things that we really value, like drinking water, is important, and that's why we do this monitoring.
Could I ask you a question?
Yep.
Just about that, about your perception of groundwater. The Chinese use a very different way of looking at groundwater, and they even use dragons as part of their in the older system to describe the way groundwater works. But we appear to take quite a mechanical view. I don't know if this is true, but do you know of different ways of perceiving? Because often it's the way you see something dictates how you respond to it, either effectively or ineffectively. It just seems to me we're still taking that very channelized mechanical engineering view of groundwater, and I don't believe that's where the truth lies, but you might have a comment.
Yeah, I mean, I guess these conceptual diagrams are very much a rough approximation, or perhaps it's just the way that we have tended to express things in New Zealand or in Western culture for quite a while, like you say, in that mechanistic type way. We are aware that the triviality is far more detailed and complex and isn't represented well, but I sort of take your point, and I do agree that, you know, there is a lot of complexity and detail there which isn't represented well sometimes in our conceptual depictions. So just talking about quantity now, so that is, you know, the volume, the level that we monitor. So we have 21 telemated sites across the region, so that's where they are measuring the water level almost every 15 or 10 minutes, and that comes back to us. And so of 5 of those 21 sites, we have recorded levels at the moment which are considered below normal for this time of year. And these are predominantly our terrace, confined or semi-confined aquifers. And this is largely a result of the extended drier period we had last year and the effects that that's had on groundwater in the region. So Phil is going to run through some of those sites and just give a quick look at where those are. But this diagram just depicts, what the difference is between a confined or semi-confined aquifer and an unconfined aquifer in the top there. Of course, those unconfined aquifers are going to be recharged quite readily when we get rainfall like we have in the last couple of weeks. So if they're connected to rivers and streams and to the surface, whereas those confined aquifers can take a much longer period or of time to recharge, or require recharge at a certain time of the year in order to come back to where they to their normal range. So Phil, do you want to take us through these graphs and just maybe talk to what they mean? And
Yeah, sure. Good morning. So these graphs are generated on a daily basis for several of the telemated sites. And the blue trace you can see there is the current trace. Start June this year and it'll go through to June next year. The white trace is the average groundwater level for this time of year. And as you can see, this particular site that monitors the Edendale Aquifer is below what might be considered normal or a normal range.
Just on that, I was looking at these graphs here and it appeared to be about normal, and yet that's not. I know this is one that often is locally charged. I was just looking at the 18s, etc. Both the Edendale ones, when you look across the thing, you pick up and think, oh, it's about normal. Is that just a seasonal thing, or is that?
Yeah, an aspect of that for sure. It also depends how the data is treated between how that table was produced and how these graphs are produced. There's some averaging that happens, and bear in mind that a small difference between average groundwater level and what this might be is actually quite a big difference. Millimetres matter in many cases.
yeah, so you might look and see it's still 18 metres below the ground, but on a long-term average thing, if it's only 5 centimetres outside where its normal range is, that might be quite a significant difference when you're looking at the long-term picture. It depends sort of site to site, yeah.
Can I just follow up on that?
Yep, sure.
I looked at the graph too, and I actually saw bigger changes in other areas that weren't highlighted than what there was in the highlighted areas. I've seen this one before, or these others before, but they have a seasonal flow. It depends on where they are. They will always do their, and Riverstyle's the same. They'll always have the same pattern. It's just where it starts and finishes through there. And I just didn't quite get the urgency, I suppose, that I read in the paper, that you were saying they're outside of the norm, and then, of course, the follow-on question is, what do you do then if they are outside? Even if you restrict the take, I don't think you're going to see a massive jump up in aquifer level. That's my understanding from other meetings. So I'm probably struggling with the indication through the graph of the risky 5.
Yeah, I suppose it wasn't the intention to highlight this as a risk that necessarily needed immediate action or anything like that. It was just highlighting that there are some aquifers across the region that are potentially more susceptible to changes in our climate and the timing of rainfall and recharge and that kind of thing. And like you say, it is very much dependent on the timing as to setting up that cyclical nature that the aquifer then goes through. But it's just worth thinking about what the implications of that might be. If we don't get recharge in 1 year and then it rolls around to the abstraction and irrigation season again, and we haven't had that recovery, what's the longer term implications of that going to be?
The question is, Mr. Chairman, too. Isn't the solution then just to go deeper, because below what you're monitoring, the sediment is saturated?
like what about 50 metres or 100 metres or something? Is it feasible to extract water from that depth, or are we just used to just having our extraction from relatively close to the surface?
Yeah, it's feasible. Of course, it's extra cost for everyone to drill deeper, and those lower groundwater levels, of course, have impacts on our ecosystems as well. You know, that wetlands, the base flow recharge to rivers and streams, which is critically important over the summer period. Most of up to 80% of the water in our rivers and streams at the dry period is coming from groundwater, or more than that. So, yeah, there are impacts on ecosystems and financial for people who would have to, and it's not feasible in all cases.
So this is the next site of note, I suppose. This is the Garvey Aquifer. Similar story. Still playing catch up in terms of recharge, and like you all said, will depend on rainfall through the rest of the year and those sort of favourable conditions required for that.
A little bit of clarification, whereabouts is that? Garvey Aquifer?
Sort of Wendon area. It's contained in the Wendon groundwater management zone.
So in the Mataura area of Mataura River.
Just on that, we always know that's been a slow recharge and we always consider it to be a confined aquifer, but I'm pretty sure that during the discussion on the irrigation and the Mataura, there's been some question as to whether it's totally confined. Is that correct, or is it?
Yes, so the Garvey Aquifer was sort of reclassified when we did some of the work for the proposed water and land plan into a semi-confined. It was taken out of that sort of specifically confined status. So yeah, I guess the understanding now is that it's a leaky sort of semi-confined
aquifer. Another one. This one is the Waimea Plains Aquifer at the Glenure Road monitoring site, and interestingly you can see that the blue trace fell below previous data that we had, or previous levels that we had for that particular time of year, and it wasn't the only one to have that happen. We did have one or two that reached lowest groundwater levels recorded in our monitoring network over this last summer.
The lag between recharge, because my own rainfall data had been different. July was our wettest month. It's been our wettest month this year. Yet that shows up as the aquifer still losing water if you flip back to. So July. But now it's away. So is that reflecting in some cases the lag between the rain events, recharging it, and why it's taken a while for the worm to turn?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So the following question to that, Mr. Chairman, if I may, is that we consent a number of takes based around river flows of the Mataura as an example. So depending on what the Mataura is doing is what they are able or not to. But if I read these graphs, it's suggesting that we should actually take into account the aquifer level. We've never done that as far as I'm aware, and I don't know what that does to irrigation takes.
I'm aware of some consents that do take that into account, but it's not very common, and potentially something to look at moving forward.
Very good comment, because we've had
Aaron, you're coming forward with a determined look on your face. Talk to us.
Yeah, so that is taken into account and for groundwater, it's treated a bit more like a bucket, so it's taken into account in terms of the total amount that can come out of that bucket or that aquifer. So that's how that is managed, and then the surface water is to manage the instantaneous, I guess, effects on our surface waterways as a result of pumping. So it is managed, the groundwater level aspect is managed, but it's managed in a volume basis, as opposed to in real time for most aquifer systems. The exception being the confined aquifers, because they don't recharge as readily because they're not as connected to the surface. So And they are also at risk of that land subsidence as well. So if they dewater, that can result in land subsidence. So they do have groundwater level restrictions on those particular aquifer types.
So the proposed new flyovers at Larder or radiometric work that is being done will help you in that understanding of aquifer length, where they are held for movement, is that correct?
So that helps us in terms of understanding, I guess, where the buckets are and how they're shaped, not so much in terms of the water that sits within them and how it moves.
Yeah. We're getting, and I didn't have a plan for doing this, but I think it's appropriate that we actually have discussion as we're going here rather than have the thought, and I hope that's not distressing you too much, team. But I have both Peter and Robert now and Nicol wanting to intercede at this point. So we'll start with Peter.
Contribute.
I think this is really important, just the discussion, totally get that right now. We don't, I don't like to use the word, but we're going to we sleepwalk into another issue like we had last summer. And we use the word, we can only use the word unprecedented once. We can't continue to use it. So it's a bit concerning for where we are and where we could be. So I think that's really important on what is the capability of that aquifer to supply, and maybe we need to be going down that track of understanding that recharge, because that may change over many years with climate change or what we can have, and give specific advice. Because with all that too, people seeing what's happening with the climate, so there's going to be more ask on that water, on that resource. There's going to be a hell of a lot more interest. It sort of reminds me a bit of how Doc will talk about their mast season. Look out for that when that comes. Maybe we need to have issued some other sort of advisory around specific aquifers, but really good discussion right now, I think.
I guess one example I could add to that, I might call it adaptive management that happens in the Five Rivers area, is when if the aquifer doesn't reach a certain level by a certain date, then the takes associated with that aquifer are reduced by a certain percentage for the coming season. So that might be the kind of thing you're talking about, looking more closely at the recharge, what the status of the aquifers are at, and then having a system there to adapt the use of that resource appropriately.
Robert?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My question is quite generic, I suppose, but just listening to all these discussions and further to the idea of this mechanical approach that we take, thinking about water is quite different now for councils, and with the introduction of Te Mana o Te Wai and Hauora as our lens through which we are supposed to view, we don't appear to, this is a different presentation, but we don't appear to be doing that with groundwater, and so I'm wondering at why that is, and also an earlier comment that you made about nitrates in the water, and I guess we're thinking about the importance of that in terms of human health, but I'm wondering about these aquifer systems and the life, the mana, the mauri, that approach to this particular part of the environment, groundwater. I don't hear it, and I wonder, has it not percolated down into your area yet? I'm sure it has, but I just wonder why we're not thinking about that. And further to that, in terms of assessing what we've got, we're looking at volumes, and we're looking at fluxes and flows and all these kinds of things. But are we looking at the life force, literally what's living in there? And when you talk about nitrates, and other pathological organisms, are we looking at what the effect that is having on the living things that undoubtedly are in those aquifers, the whole gamut of wriggly things that must be down there? I just wonder if we are, and why aren't we hearing much about that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So in terms of the draft freshwater objectives that have been developed, which are our region's interpretation of Te Mana o Te Wai, it absolutely includes groundwater And it absolutely includes considering providing for the life supporting capacity within groundwater systems, as well as connected, systems that are connected to groundwater. I think we have there's sort of a three-pronged approach to management of groundwater and surface water that has happened. One is groundwater and surface water have been kind of managed separately, then they've been managed in terms of the effects on each other, and I think that's probably where we're at. Where we know we need to move to is to treat them as a coupled system and to manage them jointly, and we're in the progress of moving to that space. So and I think the draft freshwater objectives help move us there.
So are we monitoring living things in the aquifers?
We are involved in research projects that are certainly doing it, and Southland is a big area where we have quite a bit of information around that. It's not included yet in our state of the environment or our routine monitoring programs, just simply because that science is a little bit too new to really know what all that data means in terms of understanding, state and trends. But it is absolutely providing for that is absolutely included in the draft freshwater objectives.
Sorry, if I just might just say one more. In terms of DNA testing of water, which is being used for a lot of other purposes, that surely must be a key tool in assessing what's under there rather than digging it up and looking at it through a microscope. Would that be a fair comment?
I think the technology will move to that space. I don't think it's quite there yet for groundwater, but we're certainly, there's quite a number of national research projects going on around eDNA and its use and this type of thing. So,
I'm not sure we're dealing with this in the right way. How much more have you guys got?
We've done pretty much.
Right, okay, so we'll take the questions now. Nichols next.
Yes, well, like you and us sort of answered in half my question that you do monitor the groundwater and that does affect the cut-offs, because when you look at that graph, we tend to peak before the summer period mostly, depending on so the rainfall's a factor, but I was reading that the extraction was also a factor in that, and that downward trend sort of generally through.
Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Can we have that other one back up again, please? I like that one. That one there reflects a band of gravels that are about 3 metres deep. So, obviously understanding the depths of gravels, a little bit with Lloyd's comment, we've got water bearing gravels at multiple levels. And so in this instance, we're looking at from 150 metres above sea level to 100, so only 3 metres. Do we know below that, is there water bearing gravels that would reflect deeper levels and obviously more groundwater that's still available? Because from the Arete, where I am at Dipton, I know there's at about 17 to 18 metres, there's a band of gravels, or 17 to 20 metres, there's a band of gravels, and a lot of bores drilled to 17 metres to extract that. But there are also other layers of water where deeper bores go. And so we get maybe animated over this band of gravels being a little bit depleted. But do we know what the band of gravels are like at deeper points? And particularly when it comes to irrigators who might be drawing off water from a deeper band of water, and they get, we inform the community, or this one here is looking poor, but those who are at a deeper level have still adequate adequate water to maybe continue irrigating. How do we see our base of data?
So I'll start again. So through Mr. Chair, so the intake for this particular bore that we're looking at is, from memory, around about 18 metres deep.
Is
about 18 metres deep.
18?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and above that point, all those gravels are saturated, and what we're seeing here is the top of that saturated layer. So where it says,
That says 3.5 metres below the ground. down to 6 metres below the ground.
So what you're seeing is where that point of saturation exists, so it's where the water table is sitting. So this is the water level movement at the top of that saturated depth of gravels, which obviously goes much, much deeper than the 6.5 metres you're seeing there. So this is just showing that the movement at the top of that whole band of saturated gravels.
But the resource of groundwater may be bigger than that, or you're saying, because there's firm layers between layers of gravel which might make them, that's an unconfined aquifer. There could be another unconfined aquifer at a deeper level.
Not another unconfined aquifer, that's where you move into your other types, into semi or confined. Unconfined means that it's all connected, all those gravel layers are connected.
So like a barrier or a layer that sort of reflects, doesn't allow the water to percolate through.
Yeah, something that prevents water movement, and then you're moving into a different aquifer type. But if there's nothing to prevent that water movement, then all of those gravels are connected, all the pore spaces between those gravels are connected, so it acts as one system.
Right, okay, Nicole, oh no, Lloyd, I think, yeah.
See, I'm just wondering, this is quite fascinating.
Yeah.
But it's really more fascinating for the new council to get their head around.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, it's interesting for us and we're deeply engaged in it, but I'm just wondering whether we're here to note the report.
Yeah.
I think there's some great work, some great questions around. I really think we're probably going forward now to a workshop with the new council to get a better understanding of this. And with that note, kind of be as bold as suggested, I move the report.
You've summed up exactly what I was going to say, and I think we would commend you for the ongoing work, and I think you can see that this is a matter of intense interest to the Cabinet, the strategy and policy team. It's wider than that. It's something I've had an ongoing interest in for some time, and I just note that of all the water on Earth, nearly 97% is saline impacted. So we're working with about 3%. Of that, 2/3 of that's locked up in ice caps. And worldwide, 70% of the abstraction from artesian water goes to agriculture. In the United States, it's 86%. And if you want to seriously scare yourself, Google aquifer depletion. The Ogallala aquifer, the main one in America that runs from Canada to Mexico, they're now 1,200 feet further down on average than where they were when they started taking it. This is an issue that's going to confront the world, and so your ongoing work is of intense interest, not just to me, but to the council in general. So I think we need to keep the dialogue going. I think the point, and you've moved it, is there a seconder? Or I'm going to wax eloquent for a bit longer. So, Nicole.
Well, I'll second it then.
Nicole, it's moved and seconded. Excuse me. I'll put the motion. Those in favour would say aye. Aye. Against, no. That's agreed. So we come now to item 5 on page 46. Who's going to? David, are you going to talk to us? Right. Let's go.
Good, okay, thanks very much for having me along today. We'll take the item as read if that's okay. So today is just really a quick overview of what Intino is and how it benefits the ratepayers as well as the staff. So just skip through here. So as that says, it's a free app that helps people keep connected with targeted, timely and important updates and reminders from ES about places that they care about. So it's targeted, it can be targeted to a home, to a workplace, to a school, to a holiday home. And people can also submit reports from the app as well. So it doesn't replace what we've already got. So we've got website flood warnings, Pest Hub. So it's just really, it's another channel, it's another useful custom-centric channel for us to get messages across and allow that two-way engagement. One of the really good benefits to Antino is that Gore District Council and Southland District Council also use it. So if their users will automatically be signed up to the ES alerts, which is great. So yeah, they've got quite a good, Gore's got, I think it's 1,300 odd people signed up to it already. So yeah, we've already got a good user database to begin with. So as far as what Antino can do, so it's a push notification system. So there's all these categories down here. We can notify specific areas, towns, districts, FMUs, all that sort of thing, with specific messaging. So there's council services, emergency management. So flood warnings along a specific river, we can push out those notifications to people living in that area, which is really useful. Toxic algae alerts. Do anything else like rates reminders or community events or maintenance, perhaps on a river side or something like that. So when you've downloaded it, which hopefully everyone's had a chance to do, the first notification you get from VS is a welcome notification. Sometimes it takes several minutes to show up, so don't panic if you don't get that straight away. And the other great thing about Antino is that you can use it to report things. So we've got, if you look at your phones, if you look at your app, you'll see there's a whole bunch of categories there. There's three that directly affect, that come straight to Environment Southland. So that's boating and shipping safety. So if you see a navigational hazard, you can take a photograph of it, put a dot on your map, and that comes straight through to our team here, and we can action that. Feedback and ideas, so that's, we've already had a couple of those through, so just some ideas from the public. Health and environment, so that's things like if you see a rock or a wallaby, or if you see spray drift or pollution in a river or something like that. So you can take photos, put a pin on the map, and it comes straight through to us. It's all integrated into our database, our IRIS database, so it goes to the right team. Notification goes back to the phone of the person that's reporting it, saying that they've received it, and it's underway, and and then it just goes through our process of being actioned, which is great. So that was the super speedy overview. Any questions?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, Lloyd and then Nicole.
Don't get me wrong, it's a great initiative, but we've got other people that send us stuff, and they send us a whole lot of stuff, and you get to the point that you don't actually connect with the important information because it becomes just another notice. So is there a way that there are some things that like is mundane, general knowledge, and there are other things that are more important. I'm thinking of floods or hazard, like a threat to human life. Yes. Is there a way that we can very quickly see that this is urgent, high level against a mundane notification of general interest that you may be able to?
Not really, but if it's a mundane notification that you don't want to receive, you can opt out of those notifications. But unfortunately, you can't opt back into them. So if it's if you live in the SDC, Antino is working on a way to opt back into it. But pretty much all notifications through at the same level of importance. But it's just another good channel for us to get that information out.
It's great from my point of view because I'm not always on the website looking at stuff, but it comes through to me. We had that emergency thing that came through as well, that your phone would call and beep. So, there are some things that are more important than others. So, that's sort of...
Yeah, it's not like a national alerting type system like they have, emergency management. If there was a life and death situation, it would probably use that system as well as this.
I'm not one of those chosen survivors actually on that national alert thing. I've never had mine beep yet, so I'm out of here.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So just on the, I've got the app open, choose a category. So have you worked with the other TAs over, that's ours, this one's for us?
So they automatically go to the right TA.
So and if I was thinking, jolly, the neighbour's burning rubbish again, that's a nuisance. I've gone to nuisances and it doesn't
It might be health and environment.
illegal camping noise complaints, so that didn't work.
So it would be health and environment.
Health and environment.
There's solutions and
The categories were set by Datacom, who set up the Antino app, so the categories are consistent across the country for those that are using the Antino app, so there's multiple councils using the we kind of stuck with what they had, and we put some new ones in and we X some out, but how they work is largely dictated to us.
And that then defines who's going to get it, either yourselves or the Southern District Council.
Yeah, it's easy enough to forward it to another council as well.
If it goes to the wrong
If
one,
it goes
we'll
to the
know.
wrong report, yeah.
And so who does get it? So is it a team or just one person? Is it Adrian's problem or is it?
Definitely not my problem.
Where does it go to?
So it comes into database Iris, and that's sort of getting sent out to the right team. So if it's a rook or a wallaby, it goes to the bio team, or if it's pollution, it goes to compliance, that sort of thing. If it's a feedback thing, it comes to me. So
I guess my question is how quickly it would happen. I had a call from on the way this morning to say that the waste net truck had blown a hose that picks up wheelie bins, was carrying on, didn't know about it. It was hydraulic oil running down the street. If they put that in there, would that come to us also, the district council, because it's their contract? Would simultaneous, and how quickly could we respond?
It would only go to one council, and it would depend on the categories that the person chose when they put the notification forward. Yeah.
So would that still be as effective, or ideally that'd be better to call?
Definitely better to call.
Pollution hotline, because it was urgent, rather than actually calling the chairman, actually, which.
Yes.
In terms of anonymity, from the person who's ringing, say, Alan's example about a fire or a fence, have you got protections around that, and what are the rules around somebody discovering who made a complaint? Have you taken that into account?
When someone puts a report in, they have to provide a minimum level of information, including a contact phone number or an email address for us to go back to them and say, this is what we've done with your complaint.
If they don't, they won't get through the system.
They won't be able to push it through. They won't be able to report. Yeah. And then once we've got that, then the other rules around privacy and stuff apply. So
I'd like to find out a wee bit more about that sometime, not right now, about what the complaint is.
It was looking into all of the stretching.
All right.
we might be
are
more
we
responsive.
Sort of concluding the discussion. Would someone like to move that? Yes, thank you, Lyndall.
And endorse its use.
Right, and seconded by Alan. I'll put the motion. Those in favour would say aye.
Aye.
No, that's agreed. Item 6, strategy planning and engagement work plan. Don't fight over it. Talk to
Thank you,
us.
Chair. I can kick off and then I'm sure Lucy will add. So this is a regular update. It comprises an update of things happening at a national and regional level as well as the group work program. Perhaps just to highlight to the committee that next month is going to be a particularly busy month. We've got in the RN reform space the two pieces of legislation due to be introduced to the House. We have the local government, the future of local government review, the group panel bringing back its interim report, and then we're also expecting this, the second piece of legislation in the Three Waters space. So the November Strategy and Policy Committee agenda will no doubt be quite full. From a regional perspective, you'll note next month we will be getting updates from Just Transition and Beyond 2025. Southland staff are working in a number of areas in those work streams, but we'll be giving the full update in November.
Comments? Lloyd?
Stephen, I noticed on page 51, there is a submission due on the 14th September around the local government elections. While it's mentioned in there, some of the stuff it's talking about, we've had no indication whether we will be sending anything through.
So that particular one, there was a review done of the Taitoa submission, which is lodged on behalf of all of local government, and a call made that actually for all the other things happening, that we felt that that covered our bases, but if you would like that circulated, we certainly can.
Right. Any other comments? Not, would someone like to move the recommendation on page 49? Oh, thank you, Nicole. Would someone like to second it? Thank you, Lyndall. I'll put the motion. Those in favour would say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. That's agreed. So we come to the publicly exclusive section. So is someone going to turn off our connectivity to the outside world?